Welcome to Morph Into a New You, part of MHNRnetwork.com. Your host, Johnny Calloway, is the author of several books, including Taming the Dragon, Dragons to Butterflies, The Metamorphosis of a Man, and The Bridge. He will be having conversations with people from all walks of life. Healing really is an inside job that transforms you to become a better version of you. We must change our self-talk and inner dialogue so we can start to believe. A special thanks to our sponsor, Meaningful Expressions at m-expressions.com. They can take a concept, thought, or personal brand and turn it into a visual masterpiece that you can use to raise awareness about your passion or cause. They've certainly done that with our podcast website. And thank you for joining Johnny as you morph into a new you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Johnny Calloway, host of Morph Into a New You, where we believe that in order to change your life, you got to change your mind about your life. And today we have Dr. Eric Gentry with us again, which I am really excited every time we have him on here. But today we're going to talk about the psychological and spiritual benefits of working the 12 steps. I can't wait to hear what he's got to say about this. How you doing, Eric?
I'm grand. How about you?
I'm wonderful, man. Exciting things going on here. So, Eric, tell us what your take is on the psychological and spiritual benefits of working the 12 steps.
Well, I think that the first thing to say is that the 12 steps are the kind of marriage of the two of those and do it really well. That by working the 12 steps, you address significant psychological issues and work through those and heal from pains of the past, but you also can't really work the steps without having spiritual maturation, without kind of growing faith and growing a sense of goodwill. So it's the place where those two come together, psychology and spirituality. And I love that.
I love that. That's so cool. You know, the truth is, even if you're not trying to heal spiritually and you're healing psychologically, you're healing spiritually, whether you're aware of it or not. That's my thought. So I know that there are spiritual principles attached to each of the 12 steps that each of the 12 steps represent. Do you know what those spiritual principles are for each step, Eric?
I do. You know, there's different writers that have different things to say about the spiritual principles of each step, but there's significant overlap with all of them.
Right.
And, you know, in the first one, I just love that a dope fiend and a drunk in 1935 figured out really good cognitive behavioral therapy. That's pretty cool. Dr. Bob and Bill W. got together and they developed, practiced and found traction with surrender. And, you know, what everybody tries to do to stop whatever addiction that they've got is they try to use brute force. And, you know, now in the 21st century, what we've learned is that ends up being impossible, that it's physiologically impossible to stop an addiction by adding more energy to a system that is already overwhelmed. That the way you have to, the navigational process through a withdrawal symptom is relaxing, is letting go, not fighting. And that principle it just underlies everything good about psychology in the 21st century. It's the principle of that, the scientific principle of that. It's called reciprocal inhibition. And it means that the way you lower energy, the way you take a sting out of something that causes you distress is you got to confront it with relaxation. And when you do that, you lower the intensity of whatever it is. If you're afraid of bees and, you know, you confront the bee, you go to a beekeeper and, you know, you put your suit on and you step to it, but not with fear. You got to lower the intensity, relax your body. And when you do that, you're not as scared of bees later. And the same principle for how to, you know, early recovery requires that surrender, you know, that recovery begins with surrender. That is a quote from a 12-step fellowship that I attend, is that, you know, you can maybe get abstinence, but you can't recover without opening your mind and opening your heart and relaxing and being prepared to receive new ideas.
You know, on one of the other shows that I do every week now, it's called Says Who for the Addictive Personality. And we talk about being willing to basically investigate your thought system, what your thoughts are, because through my Course in Miracles training, I've learned a lot about cause and effect. And the cause is the thought and the effect is the behavior. So if we surrender, as you're talking about with the first step, and we allow ourselves to, I'd say, mellow out somewhat and look at what we're doing, some of our insanity prior to stopping and investigating some of what we're doing is just blatantly insane, but we don't ever think about it, so we just keep doing it. So as we surrender and allow ourselves, the thing that I've used so much since our first show is finding that space between, what'd you call it?
Stimulus and response.
Yeah. Finding that space. And I talked a lot yesterday, actually, in my Says Who podcast about the importance of connection and finding hope in that connection. And so when we go into a 12-step room and we surrender to basically something else other than what we've been doing, I was so blessed when I first found the 12-step rooms, because there was one thing, even at my first meeting, that I was absolutely aware of, and that was my way ain't working. So that opened me up to being like, okay, maybe I'll try your way. But yeah, that surrender is vital. It's everything. So,
you were talking about thoughts, and I just wanted to, I commented on that, I think on a previous show, but I want to reiterate it. What we're learning in the 21st century with brain science is really, it's on fire. We're just really stepping away from 20th century understanding of what's going on with folks. And, what I know now is that I didn't think for the first 3 or 4 years of my recovery, that what people who are new in recovery, they're not thinking. You can't think without a frontal lobe. You can't think without the part of your brain that does the thinking. And people who are scared all the time, which is why people use drugs to the point of negative consequences, is to try to manage that fear, is that they're not thinking. What's happening is they're being intruded upon by old thoughts. It is not an intentional thought in their head. They are instead having this kind of bombardment of negativity and harsh criticism and all of that language. If you ever dissect it with somebody, as I've done with my clients, it's all about trying to help them. It's all trying to get them out of things that they perceive to be threatening and not having them to take risks. It's like, I've got the disease of addiction. I've heard in the rooms for a whole lot of years, people share that, I got a disease inside of me that wants to kill me. And what I'm really clear is that my disease does not want to kill me, but it will. It will soothe me to death. That's what addiction is trying to do. It's trying to comfort me. It's trying to get me out of what I perceive as threatening. And, that's the way the things that are happening in my head in early recovery were all about trying to get me safe, to get me out of things that I perceived as threatening. And it wasn't until I started learning how to be around people and to be able to be relaxed enough that my brain started working and I could start to have intentional thoughts. And what was my first intentional thought? God, please help me.
Right.
It was that stepping into the second step of starting to, all of the noise that was in my head, reaching for something greater than myself and focusing on and intending to connect with something greater than myself. What that did was that started to be able to focus me, started to be able to have enough of a connection with something greater than myself that I could soothe without a substance or without a self-destructive behavior.
So I'm going to try to piece this together for my simple little way of thinking. For the first 3 or 4 years, we're basically in react mode, and we're reacting from habitual behavior that we have done over the years, and we don't even have a thought process in that gap that you talked about in our first show. We react, and we end up in the same stuff we've always been in because we're doing the same stuff we've always done. So now here's the beauty of what I put together over the series of shows that we've done. Through connecting to another addict or alcoholic or gambler that's done the same things that I've done, but let's say that person I connect with has been around 3 or 4 years and has now got a thought process. Through connecting with him, I start acquiring hope that, hell, he did it. Maybe I can do it. Now, what we talked about in my show yesterday, I have a very mathematical mind, and I have a tendency to connect dots kind of mathematically. So I get connection, I get hope. When I get hope, I start to have a taste of courage so that I can start trying new things. Does that make sense?
That's what happens at the end of the third step.
Right. So, and that's why we move into step 4, which is about courage, right?
I can't do it with a 4-step without being, this is kind of a nice way to look at it, is look at that. It's 2 words and 1 word. I-N, courage, and E-N, courage. I can't go forward in courage unless I have encouragement from people that love me, from people that I trust, from that is a relational process. That I can't do a 4-step on my own.
Right. No, I love that. I love the way you put that I-N and E-N, courage. I love that. For me, it's like, I love that whole thing you just laid out there of first 3 or 4 years. As a matter of fact, you're going to love this because you know who my first 12-step sponsor was, our mutual friend, Ed. He told me after I'd been working with him for just a little while, he said, listen, whatever your first instinct is to anything, do something else. Because all of your instincts, Johnny, are self-destructive. So then I went to work with him, and after working with him for about 6 months, one day he said to me, he said, you remember that conversation we had a while back about your first instinct? You need to do something else? I said, yeah. He said, well, I know you a little better now. He said, so I'm going to amend that. Whatever your first 10 instincts are to something, do something else. Because as an active addict, everything I did was about tearing me down and learning how to build me up through the voices of others and them helping me think things through. You know, one of the beauties early on in recovery is they say, think it through. Think that thought through. I've said 1,000,000 times in 12-step meetings, prior to the program, I never thought about anything. I had a thought that was immediately followed with an event. There was no, what are the possible consequences here that went on? There was none of that. It was like, and I'll just say it, I'd think about breaking in a house and I wouldn't think about what the possible consequences were until they were putting me in the back seat of a car, a police car, by the way. But as I learned to have that stimulant that you're talking about and then think about what happens before I react, I never did that before. So getting that is incredible.
And what's kind of coming back and underpinning that with science is that, you know, we now understand that that was not a defect of character. That was the absence of the hardware. You did not have the brain hardware online to be able to do judgment, because in an active addiction, you are constantly afraid.
Right.
And that state of finding ways and means to get more, that constant need to stay in addiction means that you're in a constant state of fear. We call it obsession and compulsion, but that's fear. And when that's happening, judgment requires the frontal lobe. And it's just offline in people who are active addicts. You know, that there's some literature in the fellowship that I attend that says, you know, by the time that we came in through the doors, we were reduced to the animal level. And that's what it was true for me, is that I was living as an animal. I was completely instinctual. I had very little opportunity to be intentional about anything. It was all reactivity.
Right. I'm sorry about the laughing, but one of the things I connected with early on in my recovery was, and I actually said this several times in meetings, prior to the program, I was like a wild animal. I went to the bathroom where I wanted to, when I wanted to, how I wanted to. It didn't matter who was watching, whatever. It didn't matter. And I came into a 12-step meeting. You guys decided you were going to housebreak me. And first you taught me how to go to the paper. So, and after a while, you got me to go outside. You know, it was like I had to be domesticated because I was definitely a wild animal. And the love in the 12-step programs, I'm like, okay, he missed the paper again. You know, it's like instead of kicking me out the door for missing the paper, you just kind of loved me through it. And in that space of that love and that understanding, okay, He still hasn't got it yet, but he's moving toward it. So let's help him move toward it. That is hope, man. That is hope. That's the encouragement that you're talking about. Johnny, you can do this. Johnny, you can do this. And with where my life is today and everything that's going on in my life, I told you what's happening before we started the show with my life. I'm like, oh my God, I have been encouraged from day one. And every time I fell down and skimped my nose, one of you guys were standing there. Come on, bud, get up. Let's go. You can do this. You can't pay for that. You can't put a price tag on that.
It's also something that's very rare. I won't say that, I've trained 200,000 professionals in the 20 years that I've been doing training in mental health. And, there are some therapists that bring that capacity to their work, that really do truly care and build those powerful relationships. But it's the exception rather than the norm in psychotherapy. Whereas in the rooms, it is the norm. It's what you get. You get this immediate connection. And, the last time that we talked, I told you about that, more science is what we're learning about the autonomic nervous system is that human beings are built to manage anxiety relationally, that we're wired that way. What we've learned about addiction is the reason we have addiction is because we were hurt so bad in our early relationships that we could not use relational. We perceived other people as such threats that we could never get honest and share with another human being. And it wasn't until, and the thing that's so wonderful about 12-step fellowships is that, we talk about in early recovery, the 500-pound phone, that it's so hard to reach out and share with another person. But what ends up happening is we either learn to share or we relapse. We either learn to build relationships and connect with other people and let other people know us and begin to utilize that process, or we die from the disease. So it took our asses getting on fire before we would start to do this thing that we're terrified of. But what's really cool is every time we do that, we get relief. There's just this immediate, if I'm feeling crazy or having early in recovery when I wanted to use, I would call somebody in the rooms and it immediately went away. Immediately, the urge to use, the compulsion to use was gone as soon as I connected with another person and I shared that. And that's magic. And, the final analysis of the presence of a loving God, the way that those of us in the fellowship, that we've got data that there is a loving God, that we don't need to have, prove it, is because all of us that stay around lose the desire to use.
Right. I've said for a long time, because I believe, people say, well, I need to see God and I need something tangible. And my thing has always been, since very early in my recovery, if you're sitting in these meetings and you can't see God, you're not watching. Because look at all the miracles that are going on around you. This guy came in here 6 months ago, didn't have a pair of shoes, didn't have a shirt, bleeding out his arms where he'd been poking himself with needles. And now look at him. He's got a job. He's got an apartment. He's coming in here. He's talking to people. Hey, and look, he's got a smile on his face. If that's not God and if that's not love, then you're not looking.
And we all lose the desire to use. If that didn't come with recovery, I don't know that it would be as big a deal as it is today. But anybody who continues to do this as a way of life, for some people it's a month, for some people it's 6 months, for some people it's a year. But everybody who does this program, not just coming to meetings, but working the steps, what happens is they come to a meeting one day, 3 months into recovery, and they go, oh my God, I haven't thought about using all day today.
Right.
And that's miraculous.
Right.
That is evidence of something happening inside of me that is greater than me, that I could not do on my own.
I'm going to direct us a little bit different direction here. I believe, for me anyway, the spiritual principle of step 3 is trust. That's where we begin to trust in something other than ourselves. And let's talk about that trust for a moment, Eric, and how we acquire that.
Psychotherapeutically, what I've been working on for the past 20 years, and I've written several books about it, and, it's integral to all of my work with people who are trauma survivors, is I teach them how to approach things that they are afraid of in a relaxed body. And, the lovely thing about that, the thing that's just beautiful, is that when a person starts doing that, they can't do that unless they develop faith to the place of trust. Because if you believe the universe is going to come down around your head, you cannot relax your body long enough to walk for 5 seconds forward. And, the more that you're able to relax your body, the less traumatic stress you have. So the same principle is at play there in the third step, is that I can't walk forward with a new life unless I have the ability to trust this process. I've had enough experience in the rooms and enough experience in the second step of where I have said, okay, I don't know what you are, but I'm going to trust things are going to work out. And then what happens for everybody I've ever sponsored and anybody I've ever known in the rooms very well is that something better happens for them every single time that they surrender to that process. Every time that they seek help and say, whatever you are, God, please help me. And that turns into what my sponsor did with me is he said, I don't want you to believe. What we're going to do is we're going to do a 90-day experiment. And I want you to start with even scales. And what I'm going to ask you to do in the morning is ask God for help, whatever that God is. You don't need to know what it is. You're just going to ask for help. And after 90 days, I want you to watch and see what happens with those scales. Is there evidence in your life for something working and changing things? And, I just had coincidence after coincidence of good things happening. And even when bad things happened, I still was able to walk through them with the support of the fellowship and using the principles. And, it just became evidence so that I was able to go forward with my third step and confront my past in the fourth step with that trust that this stuff works. And I don't need to know how and why it works. All I got to do is just come to believe that it is going to work and then take the step forward.
Yeah, that's really cool. I know for myself, my first prayer, I hope I never forget, my first real genuine prayer other than God help, was I got on my knees in a second bedroom in the house I was living in, and I said, listen, I don't know who you are, what you are, how you do what they tell me you do, but they tell me if I turn to you that my life will change. That was my first real prayer. And what started happening was I started acquiring that evidence that you're talking about how that works. Next thing you know, I actually worked an 8-hour day, and that was all I charged for. I managed to work a full 40-hour week and be there every day. Those little things, I started finding little pieces of evidence. Now, the other thing that I believe I've learned in my time of being in the 12 steps, if a person really isn't ready to quit, they're not going to see that evidence. They're going to find evidence that says, look, I might as well be using it. And I've come to believe that no change really happens that isn't preceded with desire for that change. I got to want to change. I got to want to believe. And when I start wanting to believe, I'll start seeing that evidence that tells me believing is worthwhile. But if I'm not ready to make that change, if I don't have that desire, no matter how hard I pray, no matter what, I'm still seeking that evidence that says using is where I need to be. So I have to come up with that willingness that we talk so much about in the 12-step rooms, the willingness to let things be different and to move in that direction.
And that's a really nice languaging of that, Johnny. Not the willingness to change the world, but the willingness to let things be different. Because that's how the world gets different, is by getting the hell out of the way, not by trying to fix it.
Right.
There's a line in the literature of the meetings that I attend that says, when our spiritual needs are met, all of our other problems are reduced to a level of comfort. That's like a Buddhist koan, what's the sound of one hand clapping? That's one of those things that I've spent 25 years just recirculating in my head. And it comes up to, what that means is that as an addict, where my attention immediately goes is when I have a problem, I want to fix the problem in the world. And what the 12 steps are teaching us, and this is the psychological nexus of this is how it ends up being something completely different, is that instead of trying to fix what's in the world, that we work on getting ourselves right, that we surrender, we get into a state of optimization by connecting with power greater than ourselves, where we have maximal control of our behavior, maximal intelligence and judgment and all that stuff. And then we walk through it without fear, so the problem stops being a problem. And it's just another day in the life of. What turns problems into problems is the fear associated with it. And as we're able to use faith to lower the intensity of the fear, then we stop having problems, that we just start having life. And that's what we talk about, being a spiritual being on a human existence. That's what happens in the 12 steps. And that is psychological gold too. That's where the two of those come together to just really change the way that the person has the inner life of a person.
You know, from early on for me, one of the things I've thought was incredibly interesting about the 12 steps is that there's two principles that are repeated in the steps in my mind. And one is the personal inventory that we talk about in step 4 and step 10, and how important it is to look within. Nothing outside is going to change if I don't shift the projector within me. If I don't shift what I'm looking for in the world, and I'm still looking, I've heard it said in meetings before, when I came to the program, my attitude about life was there is no gravity, the earth just sucks. If I'm still holding on to that and I'm looking out for that, that's what the world is. But as I change inwardly, as I change my belief system, as I change my thought pattern by wanting different, then different's what I see. And it gives me more encouragement to keep moving in that direction. And to me, that is miraculous, man. And it's not about, okay, if I change my job, I'm going to be better. No, it's about if I get better, my job will change. Because my attitude about my job will change.
That's right. And that's so counterintuitive for a dope fiend that it takes a while being around the rooms for that. You got to kind of move through accumulating some of those spiritual principles and seeing the evidence of that before you get willing to do that. And that's why, one of the most famous things you hear in a meeting is don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle, because that's where it comes.
Right. You
were talking about the 5th and 10th step. And I was just thinking about what was the original purpose of AA before it was AA? What was the purpose of the Oxford group? The purpose of the Oxford group was gnosis, Gnosis, which is, what gnosis is it's a Greek word for knowledge. And at the time that Christ was on the earth, that was the primary religion, was gnosis. It is the idea that you can have direct connection with God. You don't need intercession of a church. That you can have that direct connection, direct relationship, and salvation does not have to happen through the institution. And that was what, that's what Bell was doing early on. There's a text from the Gnostic Gospels, the Gospel of Thomas, that was found in Egypt in 1945. They're called the Apocrypha or the Gnostic Gospels. And here's a line from that book that I just think is everything with the 5th and 10th step. It says, bring forth that which is in you, and that which is in you will save you. Fail to bring forth that which is in you, and that which is in you will destroy you.
Wow.
We're only as sick as our secrets.
Wow.
And that's 2,000 years ago.
Yeah.
That we're only as sick as our secrets. And as we bring this stuff forth, we get salvation. As we share it with another human being, we get freedom from it. We hold on to it, man, it metastasizes and it turns into spiritual cancer and it eats us. And we can only go self-destructive from there. And that principle is just beautiful. It's physics. It's like you can't hold toxic stuff inside of you and expect to have health.
You took me on a line of thought there that is incredible for me. It's just what I've learned from working the steps. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, we have what we call the 9-step promises. And one of the lines in those promises is intuitively handle situations which baffled us. Now, for me, because that's the 9th step, once I've cleaned up my past, I think of my mind as like an office. But prior to recovery, my office was cluttered. There was a phone in there. There was a fax machine. I had no idea where my phone was. So God was constantly calling me, but I couldn't answer the phone because everything was so cluttered. Well, as I clean up my past, I clean up my office and I know where my phone is. And that's where that intuition comes from. I believe that my higher power, which I choose to call God, is constantly sending me messages on how to deal with situations. If I clean up my past, I can hear that call. So that's how I intuitively handle situations. It's not me handling them. It's me allowing them to be handled.
And I was thinking about, before 8 is how important it is, because, what you're describing is, yes, it's organization, but the real thrust of the 9th step for me is the 8th and 9th step process is the medication for shame. That's one of the things that kept us using. That is the kind of, I think, one of the tumor that grows inside of the disease of addiction is shame. That we can't look other people in the eye. We believe that we're defective and that we're damaged and that we hide. That's what addiction is. And, it's in the 6th and 7th step where we learn that we cannot change ourselves. That piece of humility is just required before I can clean up that mess. Otherwise, my 9th step ends up being all about me. It's about me trying to still dope fiend and still use that manipulation and shame to try to get something that I think I need, which is somebody else's approval. It's only after I kind of come face to face with these patterns that were my defense structure for dealing with the world and recognizing that I don't need those anymore and that they are getting in the way of me being the man that I want to be. And that I'm not losing anything by giving those to a power greater than myself. In that process of surrendering my defects of character, I am given space between stimulus and response, where in the 7th step, I can now begin to step to my shortcomings and begin to act in a way that's different. And with that, now I can go into the 8th and 9th step with a sense of self-acceptance that comes from that, so that it doesn't matter what the person's response is to my amend, that I'm able to do that because I am clearing out the wreckage inside of me instead of trying to fix, somebody else and make them like me.
Wow. Well, there's so much that is so loaded for me. The principle of humility. For me, I have a 2-part definition for humility today. One is a total reliance upon God. The other is to know I don't know. If I can live in the space of knowing I don't know, I can always learn. Always. And there's always something new to learn. And if I approach steps 8 and 9 with I don't know, being an I don't know allows me to get guidance. I don't know, but I do believe there's a source with me all the time that does know if I'm willing to hear it. And I will never forget, very early on, I was nowhere near step 9, but I heard one of the older guys say, step 9 was the freedom step. I held on to that because what I got from that is because there were so many places in my life at that time that I could not go because I was terrified of who I was going to run into. But as I did my 9th step, and another word that really stuck with me about the 9th step and those promises is if we are painstaking. Okay? So I did a very thorough 9th step, and the freedom I got from that, I didn't have to look over my shoulder. And I could walk with my head up in the world. And I didn't have to be afraid to go into Publix because there was whatever in there. I could just move about in the world a free man and what we call a man among men. Now, until I did that, I was hiding. You really touched on it. I had to hide because it wasn't a safe place to be. For me, the freedom of the 9th step is incredible.
And then there's 10 and 11 and 12. And, the way that I kind of look at 10, 11, and 12 is 1 through 9 are recovery and repair. That's repair. That is treatment. And what 10, 11, and 12 are is optimization. That's resilience. That is continuing my growth and getting better. And, the principle of the 10th step, which is a principle that's behind it for me, is commitment and diligence. That process. And, one of the researchers in my field has been studying excellence for the past 20 years. And, he's lined out that the pathway for excellence, I love this, that the pathway to excellence is getting negative feedback. you can't get to excellence unless you are getting negative feedback. Coasting on automatic, you can't get to excellence in anything with that. And people that achieve excellence they have coaches, they have people that give them critical feedback to show them where they can change and get better.
Yeah.
And that's what the 10 steps is designed to do, is for me to get critical feedback so that I can see the places where I am missing the mark, and that the next day I can make a commitment to address that and, spiritual progress. And I'm just getting better in that. That's the psychological component of that, which is also a spiritual component.
Right. But the thing is, there has to be an amount of willingness to hear the truth.
Yes, there does.
Yeah, because, there's that thing. At one point, I went to a meeting one night, and I used to always go to the meetings my sponsor went to. And one night I went to a meeting he didn't go to, and I heard that incredible thing, the truth shall set you free. So I couldn't wait to get home and call him and tell him. And I called him and I told him, and then he didn't say anything. And I was expecting all this excitement. Wow, that's really cool. I said, so what's up? And he said, well, they didn't tell you the rest of that. I said, what do you mean the rest of that? He said, yeah, the truth will set you free right after it pisses you off. Because the truth often does not make me feel better immediately. It's like, well, you're really still just being selfish. You're really still lying. You just learned how to do it where it's not so blatant. Yeah, that doesn't feel good. But if I can't hear that, I can't change that. And I've had this belief for a long time that if you're aware enough to know there's something as an issue, you're aware enough to work on fixing it or making it better. Yeah, but there has to be a degree of willingness to be able to. I used to say all the time with my first sponsor, if he had told me some of the stuff he told me while I was still hanging in the bars of the crack houses and going on, we'd have been in the floor, because I would not have been able to hear him say some of the stuff he said to me. Like, I remember one time talking about trust, and I asked him, I said, when will I trust people like you do? He said, when you quit lying.
Yeah, that's good.
As long as I was lying, I couldn't afford to believe that anybody was being honest.
That's right.
So I'm like, that hurt my feelings. But another guy that I loved early on used to say, I'd rather you be alive thinking I'm an asshole than dead thinking I'm great. The people that care enough about you to tell you the truth, even if they think it's going to hurt your feelings, are the people that I want to stick with.
And that's the 10-step process that I believe that, it's both, it is a thing that I do on a regular and mostly daily basis, at the end of the day. But it's also a bigger principle that what you just described is that, the fellowship and my support network are my eyes and ears. And I elicit that when I talk to my sponsor. I'll say, Joe, what am I not seeing? Help me see because I have, part of the disease of addiction is self-deception. And no matter how long we're clean, no matter how long we're sober, that we will still engage to certain degrees of self-deception. And so that we need other people's eyes and ears on our life and be in a relationship rather than just doing that lone wolf.
Right. Eric, I'm watching our clock here, buddy, and our time's running out, and I hate it because this is good. This is good. I hope our listeners are getting as much from it as I am. That's all I can say, because this is food for me, and it keeps me going. I hope, like I said, I really hope our listeners get as much from this as I do. I love our talks, Eric.
Well, I'm privileged to get to do it.
Well,
thanks for inviting me, Johnny.
Okay, well, before you go, I want you to tell everybody how they can reach you, what you're doing, where you're going next, and then we'll wrap her up.
Well, I am at Arizona Trauma, and that's aztrauma.org. I'm the vice president of the Arizona Trauma Institute, and that's probably the best place to reach me. If you're interested, I've published several books. Those are on Amazon. You can look for those. I've got 3 more coming out in the next couple of months. It's around, my areas of specialty are traumatic stress and professional resilience. And that's kind of what I do. And I train all over the country. So if I'm in your neighborhood and you want to come check out some of this, you're invited to come to one of my trainings.
Thanks, Eric. I love you. And you guys, I have 2 other shows already I've done with Eric that you can find on morphintonewYou.com. just scroll through the podcast and you'll find Eric and I having conversations just like this one. And I'm going to ask you to keep coming back, and thank you for listening. Have a great day. Okay, everybody, thanks for listening. Remember, never give up, always keep it real, and take time to smell the roses. And please sit down and watch a butterfly. Keep up with all that we are doing by going to morphintoanewyou.com. Thank you very much.